So let's start. So today we basically have a very special guest. Her name is Mila Pavlin. She is a UX director. So her past experience is that she basically worked as a lead UX designer at Sony Santa Monica studio, where she won her team won the VGA Awards in 2022 for Accessibility Award. And then also she was the design director at Monolith working on the Wonder Woman game, and also worked as a UX director at ZeniMax Online. And she is now working as a UX designer director at Wizard of the Coast. So Mila, I will throw this to you. Yeah, welcome. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with the UI Peeps Masterclass students. I'm very excited to have you on board.
Thanks a lot, and hopefully my mic is coming through okay. Just give me a thumbs up if we're good. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I have been around in the gaming space for a whole long time, starting my career all the way back in mobile and educational games way back in the before times. Moved into hardware design where I worked on laptops, keyboards, mice, working on phones, and releasing those for Razer. And then moved into the AAA gaming space with where I joined the team at Santa Monica for the 2018 God of War. And then moved on to God of War Ragnarok, becoming the lead on that project where we shipped a blind playable version of God of War, which we actually had a blind player complete the game entirely on his own without any outside assistance on the hardest difficulty possible, which was incredible to watch. Although we were not 100% accessible on that project, we made some big strides forward on how we think about accessibility. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you all about was kind of give a little bit of insight into the process that we went through, not just on the accessibility, but also on the UI in general around the God of War project. Talk a little bit about getting into the industry, because I think that that's something that's really important for folks as they're building their portfolios, how I actually made that transition from hardware and mobile into the AAA gaming space. And then maybe take some questions and answers from you all. I unfortunately will not be able to talk about canceled projects. Those are still under NDA. So Wonder Woman project, although I adored the project and I really loved working on it, it's all under wraps, so I'm not able to speak on that. And my work as well on the ZeniMax Online Studios, that's all under NDA, so I'm unable to talk about that. But I am currently working with Wizards of the Coast on Magic the Gathering properties. Happy to answer any UI related questions, UX related questions on how you can grow your career. So let's get started. Let me share a little bit of my screen. Hopefully this will come through. Give me a second here. So let me know if that's showing up. Cool. So I want to start out with just what looks like a really, really low res wireframe here. The reason I want to put this up here is that this was a design test when I was moving from from hardware to AAA gaming, where we were given 2 hours to put together a UX wireframe. This was, I can't remember if it was, I think it was Sketch was using at the time, might have been Adobe XD. But basically, sit down in a room, doing an interview. You have 2 hours to put something together, and this is the level of quality that was required to get into the job. As you can see, it's very sketchy. It's not highly detailed, doesn't require a lot of that fidelity, that kind of art that we're looking at. What this really was doing was looking at process, looking at the thought process of how you take instructions from a game design document, look at the constraints, and try to bring it together. The things that stood out of this, and the reason I'm bringing this up, is that when you're trying to break into the industry, a lot of times it's not necessarily what's in the portfolio artistically that's really pushing the bounds. It can be something as simple as they saw a layout and it didn't look like a particular game that they've seen a lot of portfolios from. It had something unique or different or something that they were looking for. Now, the thing that stood out here, and the reason I bring this up as a starting point, is that God of War 2018, this, you may be familiar with this screen. And what we had was a screen that had a lot of information, very dense information, a heavy RPG kind of element, very small text. And as you can see, the hero character, Kratos, is very large in the background, but you can't see the character very well. In fact, as we go through each one of the screens, we're oftentimes having to cover characters with stats, cutting into the image area. And you can almost refer to this as like the window of Kratos, right? This is a very small sliver of being able to see the character. It doesn't feature that very well. So looking back at that original wireframe, what we're seeing here and what I think the team saw in this was giving breath to the characters, trying to show something in which the characters really sit at the forefront and have the ability to breathe. The term that was thrown around in the office a lot was unboxing, moving the characters out of the box and trying to get them to have more freedom. So as we look at the challenges of that, when we look at that original screen, trying to increase the text size and give the character more space, we moved into a process of trying to unbox Kratos. We've given Kratos an entire third of the screen in order to sit in, and we are in a situation in which we're trying to give as much breathing room to the text as possible so that it can have a larger text size. The most common mistake that we see in early portfolios is that people tend to use very small text size as their default. So they'll try to put a lot of information on a page, use very small text, and it ends up becoming like that earlier screen, very dense, hard to read on anything except for a PC screen. We are moving into an era in which our games are oftentimes being played on devices that are much smaller than what you traditionally would expect. So God of War 2018, we oftentimes saw people picking it up and loading it onto, when the PC release came out, loading it onto a handheld device, playing it on a screen that was maybe 4 or 6 inches wide. Like, this is not going to be very big when it gets to that kind of ratio. So we wanted to make sure that when we looked at Ragnarok, in the event that it would move to those kind of screens, that you have nice clear text that you can read from a distance. This moved into our accessibility considerations. As we said, not only do we want to have clear text, we want to make this scalable. So how do we make sure that every piece of text has enough room to scale so that when we increase the text size, we are able to see it clearly and not have to break all of our layouts. On top of this, we had a very interesting restriction that we had to keep the memory constraints the same size as the 2018 game. And this was primarily a restriction of publishing to the PS4 platform. So even though we were releasing on the updated PS5 platform, we also had to meet the memory constraints of the PS4 platform. So we were looking at an increased budget, or a same budget for an increased size of our UI. We had to double the amount of equipment that we were using. We had extra characters that we had to show within within this, and we had to make this all work within that. So we ended up starting to break out our, here's the kind of how the screen ended up in production for the actual release. We ended up looking at ways that we could maintain that feeling of a UI that was kind of fluid, that it felt like it had things that slid in and out, but retained fuzzy edges. So you'll notice a lot of like these kind of gradient fades, so that we could have the character stand very free within the environment, because the hero was the essence. This was going back to the philosophy of the no-cut camera. The UI effectively became the only cut in the game. And so we wanted to make it feel less like a cut by having you immediately go to a screen in which you saw a full character unhindered by boxes and lines. So this was some of the decision making that we had to work with and some of the constraints. When it came to accessibility, We definitely knew that we had to have flows that properly allowed players with disabilities to enter into the game without having any problems, giving them more customization. But we also had to make sure that we had quick start options so that players that did not utilize these features could jump into the game. So our early construction of this began to develop these UI flows going into the game to allow players to go on two different tracks, one being quick start, one being a guided setup. Um, I'm just going to run through a couple of screens as we kind of see these early iterations of wireframes compared to how they ended up in the actual game. Uh, Early iterations oftentimes were messy. They would oftentimes be very quick trying to get ideas out. We had a very long development process between getting the actual screen through our wireframing process to actually getting it in game because of using the older engine. It would end up that we would have to get everything approved all the way up through the director level to make sure that it was good to spend that engineering resource on getting in the game. So oftentimes we would try and give the impression of a screen without all the art on it, to the directors so that they could visualize, click through, and we would oftentimes do like massive click throughs of these screens to get it to the final. And you can see that the end result ends up being fairly close to where we were starting. So I'll kind of flip back and forth between these two, so you can see the difference that we're keeping a similar dynamic between them. We're making slight adjustments as we go along, and the refinement of these screens ends up that the idea that we placed forward, because it had gone through the whole process of approvals, at the point in which we get to development, we're doing minor changes to align it to maybe something that changed during development or some adjustment to the art to make it look better. But ultimately, we're keeping that flow in mind. We ended up doing a navigation scheme that has this very vertical alignment because we knew that we wanted to include accessibility that would be for blind players. This can be you can use a D-pad to navigate the entirety of the UI, and it's a very simple push right to enter into the UI, push left to exit strategy, up and down for selection. And we maintained that through the whole architecture to make sure that it was completely navigable by someone with motor control issues. So we actually had players who were wheelchair bound come in and play the game, have them experience that, talk to us about what navigation schemes would work for them. This is where there's always compromises between the artistic vision and what is actually accessible and playable. We went for playable and functional over some of those artistic vision pieces, but a lot of times we were able to bring that aesthetic, the Norse aesthetic, into the look of all the items that we were doing. All of our iconography that we have in here is vector-based iconography that we actually loaded into fonts. And the reason why we did this was because of memory constraints. We knew that we had very little memory to work with, and so we could fit a vector shape that had 100 vector points into the memory, but we couldn't fit a PNG that was that was large enough to be visible on a 2K screen or high def screen into the memory. So everything had to be done in Illustrator and vector shapes and then compressed down into a font so that they could then be render scaled back up. This ended up making it, and there's a really good GDC talk by our technical designer, the lead of our technical design, Zach Bone, who talked about how we were functionally building a AAA UI on a mobile budget. Our entire UI had to fit within a very small, constrained, almost mobile-sized budget, where everything on screen had to be loaded almost instantaneously. We couldn't really have any loading time, and we had to display these characters in 3D, whom we were lucky enough that we had them preloaded in the menu. So when it came to things, interestingly enough, about loading is that we have things like the journal. The journal may not look like a simple screen, simple grid. It's got some icons. We've got a basic layout. When we actually look at uh, the in-game, what you're looking at is a 3D model. 3D model is floating in 3D space, and it has page flipping. So the pages actually physically flip from one side to the other. This meant that from a development standpoint, you had to account for 4 pages of UI simultaneously showing as the page flipped. And that meant that everything had to be rendered onto a render target that was being projected onto a 3D object. And so we had to make it lightweight as possible. And we ended up only having the memory budget for a single render target. So how do you get 4 pages on a single render target? You split the RGB, RGBA, and have each page take up one channel on that render target. And so we could only have black and white images on the end result for this. It was a really interesting challenge that we went through as we tried to get this page flipping to work. But it was a brilliant deduction that we could actually use the RGBA channels to individually render each one of those different layers individually. And so each page you're seeing is actually being rendered with a different color. We then, of course, took it a step further and we went, well, we want to have things actually tucked into the journal, make it feel like it's actually something that somebody carries around. We're going for that no cut aesthetic. This is actually a physical object. Can we have objects that fit over top of it? And so we went with some ideas around how does an actual object that floats over top of the book look, moving to that pseudo diegetic experience. It's not really diegetic because it's in menu. This is just flat objects that are floating above a plane, but you get some of that textured element. It starts to feel more like something that's actually stuck in a book, as if somebody had given you this object and you're carrying it around with you. You can see here, piece of paper stuck on the side. And this is ways for us to extend the book to put images that wouldn't normally be in there. The original idea was to have that these were sketches that had been picked up and stuck into the book and carried around with it through the journal. We also went with because we had to use only a single channel for the colors, we still could use gradients. So we have these ink swash for the highlights to make it very clear what you're selected on, still using that black and white philosophy. Skill tree took a little bit of a different turn because we had to have something that was that players could actually interact with. It had a very complex and growing experience as we went through. The original skill tree from was just a very simple tree structure. As we went through the game, for the end game, they wanted to have upgrades that you could attach to the different objects. And so we had to have these ideas of tokens that could slot in to the different pieces. We ended up going with kind of a stone motif. This was all hand placed nodes, so each one of these had to be kind of placed in the 3D space. But the idea being that they're kind of chiseled into rock. Once again, keeping that idea of the diegetic experience without actually being diegetic. This was a very interesting one because we said we weren't going to cut away from Kratos. When we got to the skill tree, we just decided, hey, we need all the space on the screen. If we're going to hide Kratos, we're just going to get rid of him entirely from the screen rather than try and have him peeking out from behind it. Or there were some original, ideas around, oh, could he still be there showing off the actual moves instead of having a video? But we decided that having the video up in the corner was close enough to that idea. I think the crowning achievement, though, was our actual, actual diegetic experience here, where you have the realm door, And this was a conceptualization that we wanted to try, and we were trying to bring more things into the world so that we could have less of a cut in the experience. This was probably one of the most successful, where they said in the no-cut experience, how do you actually have a realm navigation? In the original game, we had this huge realm table that you would walk up to and spin it. We wanted to have a lot more flexibility and detail around how we did this. We wanted to be able to access this from anywhere in the game. And so the idea of actually projecting the UI onto the physical door that constructs itself to transport you from one space to another, and then having Kratos stand in front of it and be the cursor, became the experience that we had dreamt up. And the team executed on this incredibly. So the animation, managed to get some, great movement. We have the actual, cursors running on a projected texture on top of this door. And then narratively, it was written into the game that you're actually finding these objects that help to unlock the next portal. And so they begin with only one unlocked, and then you slowly unlock them as you go along. This was something that was it was incredibly fun to work on, because seeing original sketches of this, which I didn't have any on hand to put up here, but then seeing it actually taken into the narrative and becoming part of the story was probably one of the most fun things, of having UI actually impact story, as opposed to usually the other way around, where it's like the story just tells you what you're going to do in the UI. We're like, no, we have a UI idea that we want to have happen. Can we have it be part of the world? Um, the last thing I'll talk about here on the inventory was the idea of how UX impacts gameplay, and how it can actually impact in reverse, then come back to impact in the UI. In the original game, we had the ability to attach stones or runes to equipment. And so this, you get a piece of equipment, you would put some rune stones into it, and then 5 minutes later, you'd get yourself a new piece of equipment, and you'd have to move the rune stones over to the new piece of equipment. And this was a loop that was kind of tiresome. It took a lot of effort from players to go through. One of the first things that helped work on when I entered into Santa Monica was sitting down and figuring out easier ways for players to transfer their enchantments over to the new piece of equipment. And we had tried out some things like, hey, can we have a quick button that allows us to swap it from between equipment? And that's what we ended up shipping on the 2018 New Game Plus feature when that came out. That was we had a single button that you could press, and it would just swap all of your enchantments over. But we still ran into problems where you say, well, a piece of equipment might not have the same number of slots. How do I know which ones I want to transfer over? How can I make that feel good for the player? And so over the course of development of Ragnarok, we started getting this idea of the enchantment progression, the rune and enchantment and progression is really about unlocking power slowly over time. And the pieces of equipment were just convenient things for the progression team to attach this to. But fundamentally, it didn't need to be attached to the actual objects themselves. We could have this as a separate menu. And so we worked with them on this idea of adding in a new piece of equipment called the amulet, and the amulet effectively holds all of your enchantments. And so then the player could choose to add enchantments to this amulet. They could repair the amulet over time in order to gain more slots. And then once they reach their max capacity, they would have access to all these enchantments. And this ended up becoming a very popular feature, and presented a really interesting view of how working with UX actually builds a game feature that then becomes a really usable component within UI. So we're not always just on the receiving end of the flow. Sometimes we're actually influencing the game design itself in order to make the experience better for players as they go forward. see if I have any more slides. I think that was the last one there. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And I would love to open it up to some questions for folks to see what you're interested in learning about. I'm happy to dive into any areas that you might find interesting, whether it be UI related, UX related, accessibility related, or career growth. I'm happy to jump in and help out.
Yeah, go ahead, Ethan.
Thank you. I ask on myself and not behalf of my clones. For the uh, version that you showed before with a lot of the UI that was like a lot of small text and very condensed, was that I might have missed if you mentioned it. Was this from a prior iteration with like a high fidelity or like past games specifically that you were trying to like build off of, or your team kind of like worked on this at first and then said, actually, let's continue to like simplify it?
Yeah, so that original screen was the released version of the 2018 God of War, which was
Right.
that was the final that was sent out to the public. This one of the challenges that they encountered was immediately receiving feedback from players that the text was too small. There were a couple of news articles that came out about it. They were like Kotaku, etc. Um,
Mhm.
and the major mission that we looked at there was, hey, how do we take this, knowing that we're going into a new game that has to be a sister game to the original. Like when you're doing a sequel to any game, you have to maintain the essence or feel of the game when you switch over, so that players
Right.
don't feel that they're playing something completely new or different, unless you're doing a complete rebrand, which does happen. But for the most part, if you're going from, if I played Ghosts of Tsushima and I'm going to play Ghosts of Yotai, I want the experience to feel like I'm like doing a continuation of that. I can have some updates or some changes, but I don't want it to be so radically different that I feel like I'm playing a different game. So that experience of moving from, hey, we've got these very dense small text screens to something that's more readable, took a considerable amount of effort from the team to really tear down what the core experience was and rebuild it from scratch, with that idea in mind of designing with larger text.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Uh, I guess kind of piggybacking off of what Ethan was saying, like how often does the copywriting team play, or how much do they play into UI in terms of character counts? Like especially when you're talking about, in the 2008 or 18 version, text was small, but I noticed a lot of the titles are much longer, whereas coming into the newer title, a lot of the titles like shrank and like significantly shorter, but still kind of were in line with the lore. So how often do you have to work with the copywriting team to make sure that, they're working within the means of the UI?
Yeah, it's a very balanced relationship, and so when we're working with narrative and copywriting teams, oftentimes they will come to us and they'll say, given this screen, how many characters can I comfortably fit? And what is our max that we can work with? And then they'll go back to the writing team and say, okay, we need to make sure that we're within this structure. It is not 100% that way, because sometimes you have a narrative beat in which you have a particular item like the Draupnir spear. The Draupnir spear, that's its name, right? It is going to be that name. And so you have to fit it within the UI. And when we're looking at that, we will oftentimes go to them and say, are there any immovable names? And can we work with those? Sometimes we get surprised by them in the end. I think one example of that is motion sensor function aiming. Uh, Motion sensor function aiming was a required terminology. So if we use, and this is gyro aim, right? So when you pick up the controller and move it around, if you're going to publish on a PlayStation and you have a thing that uses the motion sensor, you have to say motion sensor function aiming. That meant that when we did the setting screen, suddenly we were like, oh, we have to fit this sentence basically in this setting. We worked around it. We figured out ways to do it so that it wasn't impacting it, like putting it in the title and then having a setting that would say sensitivity rather than motion sensor function aiming sensitivity, which would have been a novel trying to fit it into the individual setting screen. But it's a good thing that you bring that up, because localization is also a huge thing for us, because you then look at motion sensor function aiming in German and it's twice as long, and it can get to be a tremendous long sentence of words, right? So there are all kinds of things you can do to mitigate that if it's just one instance where you're like, oh, hey, I've got to use a line break and have a return, and I have this one setting that has 2 lines on it, but I better have built space into my setting to handle 2 lines in order for that to happen. Or you get well, in German, it's small text because we cannot fit it any other way.
Awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Rye, you got a question?
Reese.
Reese,
Like
sorry,
Reese's
sorry.
Pieces. No, you're good. I was wondering, now that hardware is less of a bottleneck, are there any like new major constraints other than like screen size and, copyright, like you were saying, if you have to put a specific like huge name or sentence in there? Um, anything big that really impacts the work that you do, or?
So when it comes to like physical hardware, if you're working on a platform specific game, like a first party game, then you know the hardware really well, right? So if we're working on a PS5 game, for example, um, that those specs, you can get the exact specifications for how fast something's going to load. You can have QA test for it. You can optimize for it, and that actually makes it very easy to work with it. As soon as you go multi-platform, you are then in the world of, I have to design for the least performant device that I am going to release this on. So you're like, I'm going to release on a mobile phone. You're designing for that performance for the mobile phone, because everywhere else it's going to be fine. You go, well, on the PS5, it's gonna load up in half a second. It's got a really fast SSD, and it's going to be great. I needed to load that fast on the Steam Deck. Like, okay, how do I do that? How do I make sure it operates quickly? We worked on God of War with a philosophy of maximum 600 milliseconds. So we didn't want anything to be off screen or have a loading bar or anything like that. So if it took you longer than 600 milliseconds, it was failing our design case. And we would have QA run through that and say like, hey, what objects are loading that are taking too long? When it came to things like the map, where you had an actual 3D object that you were trying to load in, we would have to do things like preload the maps that were to the left or right of the one that you were looking at, so that if you tabbed quickly to the next one, we were already loading it so that it would hit that 600 millisecond frame. Occasionally you get things where people are trying to tab through all the maps very quickly, and we have to do things like, well, we're not going to start loading any of these maps until after you've kind of paused, and we're just fogging out the screen until you've paused your tap, so that we're not loading maps that you're not looking at. And these kind of decisions have to be made kind of on the level with the tech design, where you're sitting down with them going, how do we maximize the ability for players to load this quickly? And you're not going to always achieve it, but making sure that you're focusing there. Tech will give you constraints. You always have to design around constraints. So you might have the best idea for a screen, and I would have loved to have shown you some of the stuff that's under NDA that we tried to pitch, that we really wanted to do, and just memory constraints prevented us from going that direction, where tech would just sit down and say, it's really cool, but you cannot run this on this platform. So we're going to have to go simplify and go back.
Thank you.
sometimes with restrictions, creativity comes in mind, right? You were talking about a little bit about like how you was using those fonts for icons, and that's really impressive. And then also like the book was all black and white because of the channels. So yeah, sometimes it's just like having these limitations really could like concur some creativity of how to go finding a workaround for that. So that was really
Absolutely.
interesting during your talk. So thank you for sharing that. DC, you
Yeah.
have a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you for that wonderful talk. It was awesome. And playing off of Stefan, working with constraints, the amulet. Like, tell me about how the game design team and you guys on the UX team like worked to like come up with that solution. Were they resistant at first? Were they like, no, 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 we're set on this design. We want to have it attached to the gear. We don't want to make this new kind of like. Walk me through like the nitty gritty of them being like, let's do this. Let's shake hands on this idea of doing the amulet.
Yeah, so I love this this particular piece because the amulet, I adore the process because it was not at all clean. It was one of those experiences in which you walk into the room, and I knew we had a new designer on the team, and this was going to be their first presentation to the design team, and so they had put together a PowerPoint of how they were going to do the amulet. And we walked in and everyone's around the table and you get it up on the screen and they present and they do a very good job of presenting the amulet to everyone. And the design team looked at it and went, we're not doing that. It was very much a no, we're already doing this other thing. We're not going to do that. And we walked out of the room and I walked up to the designer and I said, the seed has been planted, right? That the idea is now out there, and you did a great job presenting it. It was a solid idea. Give it 6 months. 6 months went by, and the designers came back and said, "Hey, you remember that thing you guys presented 6 months ago? I think that we kind of need it. Let's sit back down and let's go back through that idea." And it was just it was an idea that needed some time to sit because a lot of times design, especially when designers are really embedded into a particular problem, they're looking at what they have around them. They've been designing with these certain constraints. And then, the outside view comes in and it's like, okay, if that idea is good, it will survive the design process as the churn happens because designs are always coming in and leaving and coming in and leaving. You cut so many designs because, hey, it sounded good on paper, but you tried it out and it didn't work. So it just goes in the garbage bin of history. But good designs will eventually float to the top. And that was an example of it just took 6 months of people sitting with it, thinking about it. People tend to marinate on ideas. It's like I use the term marinating a lot because it's just like cooking. You don't immediately get all that flavor in there. It's like it takes time for the designers to really see the value. And once we started playing with the idea, the designers started to get excited about it, and then they started iterating on it. And once they started iterating on it, then it became their own, which investment in an idea for designers, I think, is super important. So let them take the idea, run with it, be like, here's the recipe. Now you go and tell us like what you would do with this. And they come back with great ideas down to the point where if you get a chance to go in the menu, one of the things that was really unique about it was that it has a dual design. There's a dual flow. If you start from, I have an enchantment and I want to place it into an empty slot, is one flow. If you start from, I have a slot and I want to find an enchantment, there's a completely separate flow. These two things are sitting simultaneously with different scripting patterns based on where the player starts rather than having one confined or uniform design. And this came out of a designer conversation where they were saying, well, I as a designer like to start from the enchantments, or I as a designer like to start from the slots. How can we make both of these things happen? Very fluid design. If you didn't know that it was there, you would not notice it. You just go and do what you want and it works.
Awesome. Thank you for that wonderful detailed story.
No problem.
Pablo, you have a question?
Yes, first of all, thank you for being here. Your presentation was very inspiring. And I would like to ask that based on your experience, which area of game accessibility is most overlooked and deserves greater focus?
Yeah, love these questions. Accessibility is, well, first of all, accessibility in games is oftentimes overlooked until the end, in general, which I think is, I'm very sad about. Uh, Blind accessibility and low vision accessibility is one of the areas that has been the most overlooked in games, for a long time, except for a few exceptions, like The Last of Us Part 2, God of War Ragnarok, Forza did a blind driving mode. We're starting to see progress there, but it's slow, it's incremental. I think that is secondary to that. Cognitive accessibility is probably the area that is the least understood in gaming. Cognitive accessibility being learning, memory, understanding of game mechanics. So when you look at a game that asks you to do something like remember these three shapes and then run into another room and solve a puzzle, um, those accessibility concerns that if you have someone who has a lot of trouble keeping pieces of information in their mind, or it causes them anxiety in order to do those kind of things, they can cause problems for the player to be able to complete and enter into your game. Some games have been starting to add features to allow you to do things like there was a game that allowed you to take screenshots and apply them to your map, and it was like, okay, I can remember this particular thing happened here or this part of the story. Anything that has like note taking, or it allows you to kind of keep information in an easy to understand organization, fantastic. Even down to like tooltip reminders that tell you basics about the game. Like if I have a game that has a particular keyword, I think it was one of the like Baldur's Gate game had things where you could look up the keyword and see what it means. So what does it mean to buff or to enchant, or like, hey, I need to understand that in order to read this sentence. Can I hover over that word and get a tooltip that pops out? And so those things they're areas in which it's such a broad area of accessibility, and accessibility is like has multiple angles to look at it. It's not just looking at vision, motor, and hearing. Like these things are definitely really important. The cognitive aspect is oftentimes overlooked. So I usually look at those as the kind of four key areas that I start with, but then you have intersectionality, and you have things like phobias. Um, I mean, arachnophobia, big one. Grounded had an arachnophobia mode that you could turn on to turn the spiders into like googly-eyed floating things or whatever. These things are all important to someone, but every day you're going to learn that there's a portion of your population that is unable to play your game for some reason. And I think that when we address any concern, so any accessibility concern at all, what you're doing is unlocking play for a section of players. The more of those things you can do, the more you can unlock. So even though we may not be able to get to 100%, if you in your everyday work can just address one, two, maybe three issues, then that's thousands of players, hundreds of thousands of players who can play, and that means the world to them. Like when you actually see them play, I think we had a blind player who they wrote on their blog after playing God of War Ragnarok. They said they never thought that they would be able to fight Thor and win, and like that is an experience that you can let someone participate in an experience that they never thought that they were going to be able to do.
Thank you, very interesting.
To pick it back on that, like, how do you consider? Because like we all have the best intention when it comes to accessibility, right? But obviously, studios have limitation. They have a budget of times. I often get the question about like, how do you go about prioritizing certain accessibility options opposed to other ones? How do you define that? How do you like prioritize different accessibility for different games?
Yeah, I love this question because it is the hardest question in game design. How do you prioritize one particular set of players over another set of players? And the answer really comes down to it is complicated, right? The things that we did for God of War Ragnarok is we looked at a couple of different vectors, which was one, what do we have technologically available to us right now? What can I just turn on from a debug standpoint that will just enable some accessibility feature? Um, the second is what is going to impact a very large number of people? So can I do something like, for example, colorblind adjustments? You're talking a huge percentage of the population is affected by colorblind issues. So making sure that your UI is colorblind friendly or that you have colorblind friendly modes that change the colors of your objects. I think we did things in our game like we had unblockable attacks, versus the ones you had to interrupt. The ones you had to interrupt had 2 lines instead of 1 line, so that you could tell the difference just by shape when that was happening. So that when someone who is colorblind would see that, they would know, oh, that's the one where I shield bash rather than the one where I block. These are things that impact a large number of players. The third is community, basically the community's needs. So we actually reached out to groups of, groups, consultants, individuals from the community to find out what people really wanted. Who are our players within the disability community? Who wants to play our game? Bring them in for UX testing, which is the most important thing. You all should be very, very tight with your UX testing, folks. Bring them in and ask them questions, have them play the game, have them, show where they're frustrated, get that feedback. Because the most important thing is that you're never making these decisions in a bubble. You are making the decision with the community, with people who are actually want to play your game, as opposed to you as a developer hypothesizing about what's going to be the best thing to do. There obviously are some good gold standards. Hey, put subtitles in your game and make sure that they're adjustable. Fantastic. If you're shipping a game today and you don't have good subtitles, then you're in trouble, right? Right. But when it comes to the advanced features, look at your audience, figure out what you can do from the technological standpoint, to the point where our blind playable navigation, we leveraged existing systems. And I have a whole GDC talk on how we did that, on leveraging the existing systems to let people navigate through the game. Was it perfect? No, but it did enable people to get through the levels in kind of like the GPS guide me to my destination kind of way, which I thought was it was really fun, and it was definitely a step forward.
Oh, thank you so much. DC, you have another follow-up question?
Yeah, and actually, again, playing like you, Stefan, when Stefan and I were working at Meta, we were investigating like accessibility and advocating for that in VR. And the challenge that I had encountered was getting people to kind of, as an evangelist, trying to get them to understand the value of that. What would you say would be like the easiest way to convince someone, which is that's a very complicated thing, but like, what would be like would it be like the debug options being like, hey, you guys are already building this in. The accessibility is natural to the debug options. What would be like a tactic that you would say that would be successful to convince people to adopt accessibility?
Yeah, I love this because this is something you do constantly, right? Accessibility is never just easy one. You always have to have an advocate who's in the room advocating for things. And when I was working at Santa Monica, at the beginning of the game, I said I wanted to do some accessibility features, and I think they said, well, we could probably budget in, 7 accessibility features, right? Reasonable. Here's some range to work with. We ended up with 70. Why did we get there? Because we brought in consultants and players who actually had disabilities, and watching them play the game, having designers watch them play the game, the designers get invested because these are real people and they're struggling with the game. And the designers look and they say, hey, that player keeps on not picking up the health pack. Why are they not picking up the health pack? Go, well, could we put in an auto pickup for the health pack? Let's try that. Put in an auto pickup, bring in someone else. Now they make it through the encounter. Wow, we actually helped them do this natural thing that other players could do. We demonstrated that. So we're looking at small wins. When it comes to non-designers, people who have the budgets, they want to know, what is my value ratio of dollars to investment, right? Like, what am I going to get back out of this? Blah, blah, blah. We did a bunch of research, and what we found was that accessibility is a really good investment. Your dollar to value ratio is like, for every dollar that you put into accessibility, it's between $4 and $100 back. So I go into the room and I say, if I were to ask you for $1 and give you 4 back, would you say yes? Probably would. I mean, unless you thought it was like, somebody who is going to just steal your dollar and run out the door. But essentially, that's what when we're working on accessibility, we're opening the doors for brand new players. Players that could never play your game before now have the opportunity to do so. Not every game is for everyone, but if a player really wants to play God of War, we want to make sure that they can. And I have seen it time and time again that investment is always worth it. The amount of money that it takes to actually build these features is very small compared to the value that it has to players. Building that trust with the designers takes time. It's, goes back to that marinating. We're going to put the idea in that we can make this game blind playable. And by the end of the game, we are going to prove that we can do it. You all have the same exact amount of time, social capital, and budget of anybody else. When you go into the game, you're always going to be told that it's a constraint, and do you want to spend this money on this feature or that feature? These are always conversations that you have. As long as you're pushing forward, getting things in early, because the earlier you get them in, the cheaper they are to build. That is a very good structural thing. If I build this in early, it doesn't cost as much money on the other end. I'd rather spend $10 at the beginning of the game building this into the design than spend $10,000 at the end of the game retrofitting it back into it. And so these are the conversations that we have. Early is cheap. These things provide value. My value is better if I start early. Let's start building those things. And sometimes my last piece of this is Lego brick your way into it. Understand what Lego bricks you need to build out your full feature, and slowly start to integrate those components into everything that you do, so that by the time you reach the end, it's there. I mean, blind playable gameplay was one little feature at a time. Let's see if we can solve when an icon appears on the screen, it makes a noise. That's all we're trying to solve. Let's see if we can solve when you walk over an object, it picks up. That's all we're trying to solve. Those start to come together. I can navigate. I can pick up things. I can, I know when things are on the screen. I can hear some text being read out to me. Suddenly you have a rich experience, and then you're just problem solving friction.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It sounds to me also like every different platform will have different needs for different accessibility options, right? Like in VR, like, we had a lot of different issues in VR itself because that platform comes in with a different type of, how you interact with other players. So, so that was
I
really,
worked on early VR. I
yeah.
was working on OS VR when I was at Razer. In fact, claim to fame, we had a problem in early OSVR that when you put your headset on, you couldn't see where your controllers were. So my team sat down and we were like, what do we do about this? And we're like, well, we have an IR sensor on the front of our device. Can we use the IR sensor to detect the controller and render it in 3D space? You know, this was early open source VR and we
Yeah.
built that out. We did an open source patent on it, and you see it everywhere now, right? This is just from basic user testing of, hey, we're having players have problems that they put this thing on, they're having to lift it up to find their controller. Like, yeah, simple things turn into very useful objects.
Yeah. Perfect. Arca, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. You already talked a bit about UX testing, and as I understood, you had people at the studio who tested for you.
Mhm.
I was wondering if you could share some more details about that, like how many people were invited roughly, like should we think like dozens or maybe 100, and what kind of tools did you use? Like, did you use eye tracking, for example, and yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, so UX testing in AAA gaming spaces, and every studio is going to be different. So I'll kind of give a general, composite view because I've worked at several different studios and we've had different practices, but the best ones have been that you have an on-site testing lab. The testing lab usually seats somewhere around 10 to 20 participants. I would say that early testing within games tends to be in the 7 to 10 participant range. Later testing in games, you want to do 20 plus. Like when you're actually running through full play tests, you might actually source out to an outside contractor to do a 40, like a 40 seat play test. If you are fortunate enough to work with an online group that has access to an internal beta group or a group of players that has a beta server, that might be thousands. For example, like if you're running an MMO or something like that, you might actually be able to test with much larger groups. But you start small, and most of your testing in the very early stages is going to be like 7 participants, 10 participants. You're oftentimes doing what they call usability studies. Usability studies usually have one researcher in the room with one participant. They're doing direct research with them. At a certain point during a production cycle, you're going to graduate from usability studies to playtesting, small group playtesting. Hey, bring in 10 participants. They're actually playing through a level. They're on the ground. They're doing the things. And you're using tools like Qualtrics to do data management. So you're giving them surveys and you're asking them to fill out information. Did you like the level, right? What did you think of the UI, right? Did you have any problems? Eye tracking on AAA console games, eye tracking tends not to be as useful because it's a PC-driven software that utilize it. And so in order to do eye tracking, you actually have to hook a console up through a PC to have it go to an eye tracking device. So you're getting like lag and delay, and it kind of can taint the experience. So when it comes to things that are like PC driven, so if you're working on a PC game, then you can utilize eye tracking to see like where somebody's focused. Eye tracking is a little bit interesting because from calibration, sometimes you are seeing where the eye looks, but not what the player understands. So it's good to take it with a grain of salt in that you will see whether or not someone doesn't see something at all, but you won't necessarily see whether or not somebody sees it, if that makes sense. It's kind of like one of those things that is it's a little bit yeah, you want to qualify it, later on with testing or questions or answers. But yeah, all these tools that you can use, user research department, oftentimes I let them tell me what the best way to approach the particular test is, because they're experts, like usability researchers and UX researchers. That's what they do for a living. They spend all their time doing that. But the thing from a design standpoint, that as a UI UX designer, if you are focused on making great experiences for players, you have to test with players and you have to test very often. Do not assume that you know what a player wants. Hypothesize. Use that to develop and form your questions, and then test those hypotheses with real players, as many as you can, as often as you can. We would even do testing for minute changes in game, where we would run something through and say, we are trying to increase the learning of this one particular skill set. Players are not utilizing this one particular skill very often. How can we just introduce it better? What if we put this thing in the level? Run through the test. No change. What if we put this thing in the level? Run through the test. No change. What if we change the narrative context of this and give a line to a character to say something about this? Suddenly retention jumps 10%, right? Oh, we're getting there. What if we build a whole little narrative scene around this? Suddenly everyone is using the skill perfectly fine. Right? These are things that you kind of see through testing, and it might take 5 or 6 tests to get the end result. But I definitely am a huge fan of utilizing tests to validate hypotheses and use that to inform your work. But do be careful with research that you don't over-index on results, because sometimes it can reveal the problem, but not necessarily the solution.
Do you have any recommendation for a startup, for example, or a very small team that might not have the budget to basically get, user testing and stuff like that? Do you have any thoughts on recommendation of anything that could enhance that?
I mean, if you're in a small startup and you don't have budget for user testing, have somebody on your team take the reins and do the usability themselves, because any testing is better than no testing. I mean, having someone who's trained in testing is better than not having someone trained in testing. Outsourcing to a third party is good, expensive, but good. Right? Friends and family, bringing in folks that are you've met at conferences, anything that you can do to get people in the room, especially people who have never played your game before. I think that's the important thing that you learn through this whole process. User testing groups, like user research groups, they have whole pipelines of how they get participants in, and they're experts at this. So growing that skill set is great. But if you just train the muscle and you're like, hey, we can't ship this feature without it being tested, and you just know that you can't do that, understand that your information is going to be a little more biased, because you're dealing with people who know you, right? So they're not always going to give you the most critical information. But yeah, you can suss out about, I think Norman Nielsen says you can get about 80% of your solutions with about 10 people. The other 20%, you're going to need much larger sample sizes to figure out. But you can sit somebody down, and if you see them struggling, then you can identify and dig into that. But it does take a little bit of training to hold back the instinct to tell them what to do. Actually sit there and watch them struggle and just take notes and go, oh, tell me, what do you think is happening there? Right.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Thank you so much for that answer.
Yeah,
Ethan, you have a question?
Yes, another one. Based on your prior experience and now your current role working for Wizards of the Coast on Magic, I'm curious, have you had portfolio examples or just past experience working on any kinds of digital tabletop games, card games, stuff like that? Or was this mostly your experience drawn from your more recent stuff working on God of War and other similar games? And as a follow-up, do you play Magic?
Well, hey, I'm going to answer part two first. Yes, I do play Magic. I've been playing Magic since I was a teenager, and it's a game that has been kind of my dream job for since I was like 18 years old. Famously, my first major application to a game studio was applying to be an artist for Magic. I was given a portfolio review. I sat down and I was not selected. So that was it was a great experience for me because it was I was very new to the art field. I was very early in my career. I mean, 18, like just trying to, coming out of high school, I'm like, I'm going to be the best artist in the world. It was a very humbling experience, but I got to sit down and I actually got to sit down in a room with three artists from the Wizards team and had them actually review my portfolio, which was it was a great boon. And I remember, them pointing to one piece in my portfolio and saying, take this piece, make this the worst piece in your portfolio. Take everything else out, make this the worst piece in your portfolio, and add nine more. And I was like, okay, this gives me a step forward of how to grow as an artist and how to push forward. So I do think that if you're going to apply for a company who specializes in a particular area, then it's good to know the product. It's good to know the game, to understand it. Being that I've been a lifelong, someone who's been a lifelong collector, I think that that's beneficial because you get into the room and you can speak the language, and you understand the the things that players love about the product. And I think that that's something that we as UX designers have to understand the player's perspective. We are the defenders of the player in the room. We're the ones who are sitting there going, players are going to love this, or players are really not going to like this. Like we have to be that person to present that. And so anytime that you can get invested in a place, it's not just you're not just applying for a job. You're applying for a place that you are going to spend your time, spend your day. You're going to talk with other people who are around you because they love doing what they do, especially at somewhere that has a long history, and that has people that have been working there for many years. Sony Santa Monica was a great example of this, where there were people who had worked there for 20 years, and you walk in and it's like they can tell you the stories of the first God of War game that they worked on, and how that experience changed over the years. And you're coming into rooms and they're saying things like, well, when we're in Svartalfheim, and you're like, what is Svartalfheim? I better go and research and look up what Svartalfheim is. You're reading Norse mythology in your spare time. Like this becomes a part of your life, to the point where I named my cats after Norse gods, because I'm like, this is my cat Freya. She's cool, right? You have to kind of dive in a little bit if you're going to really understand the player's mindset and understand, because otherwise you're just designing screens. And if you want to just design screens, there are lots of companies that just design screens, and you can do that all day long, and that's wonderful if that's what you want to be. But if you're going to work in the game space, love the properties, they love the fantasy, the story, everything about it, because the person who you're going to be designing for is the person who has the t-shirt, who has the poster on their wall, and they're going to watch the whatever the TV show that they love, and they're all into it. Like if you can be that person in the room, then you can bring that energy, that excitement. Yeah.
As far as your portfolio, though, was that something you had to specifically tailor since it was like a different genre you were shifting from, or was that something you were able to just pull from that experience? So like we worked on these systems and screens, and this is transferable to that.
Yeah. I treat every job interview as an all-in experience. Like when I'm applying to somewhere, I will specifically build portfolio pieces for that interview. I make sure that when I'm approaching that I'm as invested in this experience as they are in me. So if you are able to take the time to let's say that you were going to apply for God of War. Let's say that you were going to do that. You go, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna apply to Santa Monica. If I look at your portfolio and you've got a reanalysis of the 2018 UI structure, how you would break it apart and how you would rebuild it into a readable thing, and it looked different from what I had done for Ragnarok, I'd take a second look at the portfolio, right? I would spend some time with it. I'd want to know, like, oh, what were you thinking in these instances? So I think that it's something that really hits home when you're doing this work. Although sometimes the thing that gets you hired is not what you expect at all. My first game job, I worked for this little mobile company called Two Clams. They were very short-lived, but I got that job walking through GDC. I picked up an application and I drew a little sketch on the application, handed it in. And the owners saw the sketch and was like, that is what I want in the game. And so I immediately got an interview. It wasn't my portfolio that did it. It wasn't anything else. It was just that sketch. You never know what is going to spark somebody's interest or spark somebody's creativity. So be nice to everyone you meet, be humble, ask questions, and just build great networking with people, because this industry is weird. Right? This industry is not like a straightforward, I can just put my portfolio out there and I'll get hired. It is much more do you fit exactly what they need right now? Can they picture dropping you into that structure and just having you run? Hopefully that answers your question.
Very much so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jose, you got a question?
Yeah. Hi, and thank you for your time. It's been real cool. Been learning a lot of stuff. At the director level, how far involved are you into the features? Like once UI takes over, or once it's kind of like once like the UX portion of it is done, are you still around to consult and make sure that like they execute the vision that you guys started, or are you kind of more hands off?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you the full view as you progress through this. Is you start out as an IC and you're like actually doing a lot of like individual work. You progress your way up to like maybe a senior level, and then maybe you have a couple of people who are underneath you who you're working with on a day-to-day basis. At the lead level, you need to be the best IC in the room, right? At that point, in your particular area, but you need to start delegating out to the best in particular areas. So you go, well, I might be really good at wireframing, but I've got this artist who's just stellar, so I'm going to just delegate all the art, pieces over there. I'm going to still help out. And you start to move into, at lead level, you start to move into like a 70% development time, 30% management time. When you step into like a design director role, you start to move into the opposite, where it's like 30% implementation or art, 70% managing strategy, direction kind of piece. So when you step into the kind of the next level up, which is just the director of level, you're more like 90% in strategy management, pitching ideas, making sure that teams are working efficiently, working with production producers to make sure that things are on track, looking forward, 10 steps. You're at the 10,000 foot level at that point. You still do have that 10% where you're going in and you're helping out, like, hey, I'm going to build a wireframe for this because my team is bogged down. I'm going to help them out. I remember when I was at ZOS, I made a check-in to the, it's like, oh, I do something in the engine, check it in. And one of the people commented, they're like, wow, you actually, a director made a check-in? Like, yeah, that's amazing. It's one of those things where it's not expected. It's much more expected that you're going to be in the direction side of it, helping them to understand, and that you're only coming in to do tweaks and help when it's like they're overburdened, you have deadlines to hit, and you need to be on the ground. But I work with a philosophy. I've worked with it from the day that I started working at all, which was I never ask any employee to do something that I wouldn't do myself, right? So if I wasn't willing to go and do it myself, then I wouldn't ask them to do it. And this is how you build trust with your team. You know that I'm going to be in the trenches with you if things get rough. So I need to understand your pain. I need to understand the things that you're going through. I may not at that point be the person who's the most efficient at doing a particular piece of the work, because someone who's doing it every day is going to be much more efficient at getting it done. But I can go in and I can tweak a font. I mean, I can do 100 icons in vector art if I need to. Actually happened. You're like, hey, we got to get it done. So let's go. I'm going to sit down in the trenches with everybody. But definitely once you reach that director of level, your expectations of actually doing the artwork side of it are different. And I think there are two different tracks when you look at it, that you might hear the term principal artists thrown around. The principal artist is kind of like the director level structure for IC, right? Or individual contributors, right? So somebody who is just the absolute expert at painting or 3D modeling. They are the pinnacle in the company of that, the person that can do that piece. But the principal artist is not necessarily asked to do the management and direction strategy piece. So that's where the careers kind of diverge a little bit. So when you go into these things, it's not always about, can I be the director of? It can be, can I be the principal artist? If you're looking for that route. So it depends on what you're good at. And my background came from direction. I started out, before I got into games, I was doing director of operations work, which meant that I was doing like audits and payroll and all those HR wonderful things. Coming into the game industry, I carried that experience forward, and it kind of allowed me to move into the track of direction as opposed to the track of principle, because it's an experience that I'd say a lot of people in the game industry have great like principal experience, and it's like the track that most people want to go on. When it comes to the management track, that tends to be where there needs to be more training and more development to reach that.
Yeah, being a good designer doesn't mean you'll be a good manager. No, thank you for
Correct. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have time for 2 other questions, and Mila does have to leave at 11:30, so we got another 8 minutes. So Miriam, you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you again for coming and talking to us. This is lovely and wonderful information. Going back to the kind of what you talked about before with your portfolio and how you got that job, got that interview with the sketch and things like that. Obviously, we are in a very different world at this point with with the job market currently, and with how applications work, and how you even like look for jobs. Do you have any suggestions for how to make yourself stand out, or how to have those kinds of more organic sorts of interactions and moments when you maybe live far away from where the networking happens or things like that?
Yeah. So job searching in the modern climate, I know is a very it's a very interesting prospect, because we're in a situation in which there have been a lot of large layoffs that have happened, and so there's obviously a lot of people who are trying to get into work. The value of your network is probably your most valuable tool. I'm going to put it to you this way, that you are going to have a large number of applicants who are on a similar level of skill. And so, if I am a hiring manager, I'm looking for somebody in a position, I may see 100 resumes or 100 portfolios that I have to sift through that that have equal levels of skill. There are going to be certain things that will float someone to the top of that, and they're going to be around, particularly things like, is it a targeted portfolio? Does it look, like the product that I'm working on? Can I see how this is already interacting with what I'm, what I need to have done? Which you as an applicant probably don't know what I'm actually looking for, right? So in some ways, it can be a little bit of a, like a hope for the best, try to put something in that you think is going to work. But if someone is recommended by an employee who's there, this has the weight to at least get that portfolio seen. It doesn't guarantee a job. I mean, we're in a job market where there may be 20 people who are recommended by employees, but those things are, they at least open the conversation. And if you have, in fact, met someone in person, so you went to GDC, or you went to the game developer conference, or you went to one of these meetups, and you just meet people, it develops there's a sense of, when someone is remote, if I've met them in person, or if anyone has met someone in person, they become real, right? At that moment, they become a real person. Like, oh, you're not just a screen. You're now somebody that I've talked to. Even having a conversation like this, you have now developed a moment in which you can say, oh, hey, I remember that we chatted on the UI, that UI talk. Like, hey, it opens up a conversation that could lead to the possibility of seeing a portfolio. Nothing is guaranteed in the industry. These are things that oftentimes you might have to have a lot of conversations going, consistently, but networking is it's gold, right? Like, that is your core way that you're going to get that first foot in the door. My trajectory from that first little game company, that game company went under. They ran out of funding. The game didn't do well, but it was really fun to work on. And so the owner of the company said, hey, do you want to stick around and just do some work on a pitch? Sure. Yeah, I would love to. I enjoyed working with you. Let's do that. Spent about 3 months doing some mock-ups, some UI stuff, for a pitch. The pitch didn't ever manifest into a game, but that moment built a level of interaction with the owner. Years later, I get a phone call from that particular person saying, hey, there's a job opening. Do you want to apply for it? Sure, I'll put in for it. That call only came because I had built that relationship previously. And I did it without any expectation of return. Like, in fact, there was zero expectation of return. I'm just doing this out of the goodness of my heart to help out because I enjoy the project. And so working on like a game jam or an indie project, people go on to do things in the industry, and you will meet all the people that you work with again. It is I didn't truly understand how interconnected this was until I'm at a company, like 3 companies away from the first company I worked for, and I'm walking down the hallway and I run into somebody that I worked with before, like just randomly. What are you doing here? I work here now. I work here too. Like, wow, those things are it's amazing how coincidental that happens, but we're a small industry, and we will effectively work with everyone. So do not burn bridges. Be nice to everybody. like kindness is your superpower. Understand that we're going to be in a lot of tense, there's a lot of tense moments when it comes to game design. Walk in the room with a calm attitude. Be the center of the storm and help people to get through those things. Be the rock for people. I know it sounds like kind of inspirational speechy, but it really is something that I live by every day. Is that I am grateful for the people that I work with. They are all extremely talented. I approach every conversation with, what can I learn from someone else? Right? And how can I help them to become their best self? So if I can have those two things happen, then good things will just come back on in the end. I know it's like kind of a hard strategy when you're like, hey, I'm trying to break into the industry. How do I even get to that first conversation? Taking classes like this, all of the people that you're in this class with right now, some of them will go on immediately to get work, and if they have a good memory of working with you, that's an open conversation that could potentially get you that opportunity to say hi, to get a portfolio in front of somebody. You've obviously got to do the lift of getting that portfolio into a position in which it's something that people want to hire you for. But if you do the work, I like to say, after 10 years of trying to break into the industry, I was an overnight success. It's like it takes a long time. It can take a long time, and I definitely did not have success coming out of college, like getting into the industry. But eventually, it broke. Right? Eventually, it was networking. That sketch only came because I got into GDC. I only got into GDC because I had been networking with somebody who was like, I have an extra ticket. I can help you get there. So it's one of those things where all of those things kind of lay in the line, and everyone you talk to in the game industry is going to have a different way that they got in. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Perfect.
And anybody here, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Please note in your request for LinkedIn that we talked on this call, because I do get a lot of requests, and it's good to understand that. But if I then ever see things that I can, shoot over to people, I tend to try and do that. Just
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mila. This was so informative for a lot of us, learning new tricks. And now this was generally very, very generous of your time. So thank you so much for everything. I know you need to get going soon. So so the best way to contact you would be LinkedIn. Perfect. And thank you so much again for all of this. It really means a
Thank
lot to
you.
me and to all my students. I
Thank
really,
you.
really appreciate you taking the time. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
thank you so much. And I hope that you all have a wonderful afternoon. Go get yourself some lunch, or, go for a walk and have a great time. And I'll see you around.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one,
Thank
everyone.
you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mila.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Mila. Thank you, Stefan.
No worries.
Have a good day.